fantastic stuff. See, I rather like that. I mean, you can do all sorts of things. Somebody said I look better like this. Senior solicitor. Or perhaps my true character is more like that. I don't know.
I'm sure it's not.
Well, welcome to Speaker's Corner. And I'd like to welcome Bettina Yarde to this particular Speaker's Corner, where we're going to talk through some interesting and no doubt provocative questions about immigration-related matters. So here's a thorny one to start with. Is the media right, Bettina, when they say that immigration in the UK requires or needs tighter control and that the numbers are too high?
I think there's two separate issues really here with this one. Firstly, the UK does have tight immigration controls, which I don't think most of the media realise. And they also normally state that the UK is the easiest place to come to in Europe, which it isn't. So firstly, the UK back in 2008 introduced what was called the points-based system, which restricted the number of migrants from outside of the EEA coming to the UK to work and to study. And since its introduction, the PBS, it's only actually got harder and the rules have got tighter governing it. So I don't think it is as easy as people make out to be. I also think that generally when the media talk about immigration, they really are talking about the asylum element of immigration. And generally they would say that the UK takes too many migrants compared to the rest of Europe. But actually, when you look at the figures, especially from last year in 2014, Germany actually took 200,000 migrants, where the UK only took 40,000. And the UK was actually the sixth in line of all the countries in Europe. So I think when we look at migration, we have to give it an overall view. So we also have to consider when UK nationals migrate to other EA countries, that we cause issues with their own health services, such as retired people generally nowadays tend to retire to France, Spain, Italy, and use their health service. Also, as you can see on lots of programs, the UK nationals, when they go, for instance, to Spain in the summer, can cause such havoc with their own, the Spanish health service. So I think if we're going to have discussions about immigration, we have to have a full debate and look at it all rather than it being one-sided.
Yeah, I mean, this immigration debate is nothing new, is it? I mean, when you look back in history to the dreaded dark continent of Europe in the 1930s, when there were such terrible things going on in Germany, and so few people were able to escape from that early on during after 1933. And it's quite surprising when you actually look into it, how dreadful, on the whole, Britain's attitude was to those seeking what is now asylum and from Europe, and the quotas that they had, and the fact that they turned around boats with children on them that sank. And you can see a parallel, can't you, today with what's going on in Europe, the same old things going on, and yet the media seem to think that this is a new drum to beat, and somehow they've learnt nothing, it would appear, in the last 70 years.
Well, exactly. I mean, what's happening in the Mediterranean at the moment is just awful. And we can't forget that the UK actually pulled out last year of looking after the water and sending boats in the water to rescue all those thousands of people that were making such a dangerous journey across the Med. It was only in the last couple of months where they've seen such a high escalation of migrants drowning that the UK has actually decided to send back in ships to pick them up.
Yeah. It's quite awful, and it really does reveal the nastier side of human nature, doesn't it? One that never appears to have changed over hundreds of years. Anyway, this isn't a political debate, I suppose. Rather more of interest to people about what's going on in the law. So I'm going to move on to another question that we've got here, which is what changes have there been to the British nationality rules?
Okay, yeah. So what we saw in April of this year is that for the rules, from under Section 65 of the Immigration Act in 2014, actually brought in rules to change the British nationality. So for children that were born to British fathers before July 2006, but the fathers weren't married to their mother, they couldn't actually obtain British nationality. They could only take the nationality from their mother. So Section 55 has basically now stated that all those children can obtain the British nationality as if their parents had been married at the time. So that's been a real change and a real, I think, it's comfort to a lot of children that are in essence British, that have never have been denied that right. And this was all basically being a result of the British Nationality Act in 1981 that had basically had gender discrimination within it.
Yeah, it seems as though that sort of thing is far behind the rest of our equality laws that we have here. It's as though it takes a decade to catch up.
Exactly. I mean, they had made alterations for children that were born after 2006. They had changed that within the Immigration, Nationality and Asylum Act of 2002, but it had still left this discrimination within the Act.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a question. I have no idea what the answer to it is, and probably the question's a lot of rubbish, but what if you have a father who's born in this country, who goes to a country outside the EU, gets married, I'm not going to say which gender he marries, and they adopt a child? Sounds like an exam question, this, doesn't it?
It is like an exam question because adoption's slightly different to being born to a British national.
How does that work?
Well, if you're born to a British national, even if they're outside of the UK, you automatically do become a British citizen by descent. But what that does mean that if you have a child that's born outside of the UK, you can't pass on that British nationality to them.
Goodness. That sounds very draconian as well, doesn't it?
Well, exactly. And there are many cases and many people who have this issue that they are British citizens by descent but can't then pass on that nationality to their child. What ends up happening in those cases is that then they have to come back to the UK and have lived in the UK for a certain amount of time, and then they can register that child as a British citizen.
Do you think these sorts of things are just a case of political ill will, or is it just untidy legislation?
I think some of it we have to look at the settings at the time. So, you know, when the when the Nationality Act in 1981 came into force, I think the times were very different from what they are now. I don't think people moved around as much, there was as much globalization as it is now. But I think we have to be very slow with changing the legislation, which has left some people in some real difficulties.
Right. Well, what are these biometrics residence permit changes about?
Yes, well, I think for those that are watching that are foreign nationals, it won't be a strange thing to them. But a biometrics residence card now replaces what used to be a visa inside your passport. So it's a card that they carry around with them that shows what status they have in the UK and what rights they're entitled to in some respects. But what we saw from the 18th of March of this year is that if you were outside of the UK, you would still be issued with a visa in your passport. However, that's now changed. You're going to be issued with the BRP cards. So what happens is that you're first of all issued with a 30-day travel visa. And when you come to the UK, you have 10 days in which to collect your BRP card. And so what it first of all started in Pakistan, and then it's been rolled out over 3 phases. So from mid-April included China and India. And then from the end of May, it included Australia, the US, and Japan. And then from the end of July, it will be rolled out to the rest of the world. So there have been some implications for employers, because when the migrant comes to the UK and starts working for a company, the company needs to do checks. And so we're always encouraging our clients to make sure that they collect their BRP cards before they start work, but not in all circumstances they can do that. So what the employer has to do a check on the travel card, but then if they don't get the BRP card in time, then the employer loses the statutory excuse for employing them. So they have to make sure that the migrant does get their BRP card and then does another check to cover themselves.
Right. Well, that's all very interesting. And thank you for bringing us up to date with those things this month. And hopefully we'll be able to see you next month as well. So
no, that'd be great. Well,